Imagine, just for a second, buying a brand new car because you genuinely care about the planet. You pay top dollar for that shiny little green badge, right? You trust the slick brochures, the earnest TV commercials, and the proud legacy of a global brand whose very name literally translates to the people's car. You're driving down the highway thinking you're doing your part for clean air, but actually, you aren't. Behind the dashboard, hidden deep inside millions of lines of computer code, a digital ghost is quietly, actively poisoning the air. And this wasn't an accident. It was crafted, coded, and deployed by some of the most respected corporate minds on Earth. Welcome to this explainer on the Dieselgate scandal.
So how exactly did a trusted global titan engineer the biggest corporate fraud of the 21st century right under our collective noses? Today, we're breaking down a calculated, multi-year deception that completely and violently upended the global auto industry back in September 2015. Listen, this wasn't just a minor paperwork oversight. We're talking about an international criminal conspiracy, one that spanned from the elite corporate boardrooms of Wolfsburg, Germany, all the way to your local American highways. How did a beloved brand manage to fool international regulators for so long? And more importantly, what does this tell us about the terrifying vulnerabilities in our modern environmental protections? Let's get into it.
Chapter 1, The Clean Diesel Illusion. All right, let's rewind a bit to set the stage. Back in the early 2000s, Volkswagen had this massive, overarching ambition. They wanted to absolutely conquer the American car market. But they had a pretty huge hurdle. For decades, American drivers associated diesel cars with, big, loud, sluggish, soot-belching trucks. Not exactly a premium driving experience. So VW set out to change that narrative entirely with a massive marketing campaign they dubbed Clean Diesel. And honestly, the pitch was intoxicating. They claimed to have solved this impossible engineering paradox. They were promising cars with incredible fuel efficiency, punchy, fun performance, and microscopic emissions. All of this without those bulky, expensive urea injection tanks that their competitors were forced to use. And man, it worked. Environmentalists, daily commuters, even governments totally bought into the hype. People flocked to dealerships for new Jettas and Golfs. But there was a tiny fundamental problem here. The laws of physics completely disagreed with Volkswagen's marketing department.
Chapter 2, The Engineering Paradox, which brings us to the actual motive behind the crime.
Because when the laws of physics clash with corporate growth targets, well, something has to give. The true villain of our story isn't just some rogue executive. It's a chemical compound called nitrogen oxide, or NOx. When diesel fuel burns under super high heat and pressure inside an engine, it produces NOx. This stuff is deeply, deeply hazardous. When it hits sunlight, it forms smog. It triggers severe asthma attacks, stunts lung development in kids, and actually contributes to thousands of premature deaths every single year. It's a massive public health hazard, and regulators were fully aware of it.
So put yourself in Volkswagen's shoes for a second. In 2007, the United States rolls out these incredibly strict new federal limits on NOx emissions. I mean, way more rigorous than anything happening in Europe at the time. Inside VW's elite engine development department, absolute panic. The engineers building the new EA189 diesel engine realized they had a choice. They could either meet these strict new American emission standards, or they could deliver the horsepower and fuel economy that consumers actually wanted to buy. The engine physically could not do both. It was impossible. Faced with a total product failure, they didn't scrap it and go back to the drawing board. Nope. They crossed a fatal ethical line. If they couldn't build an engine that passed honestly, they decided to build a system that lied.
Chapter 3, The Defeat Device. And this is where we find the literal murder weapon of our story.
Investigators eventually called this thing a defeat device. Now, when you hear that, you might picture a physical part, right? Like a clamp or a pipe you could just unbolt from the engine. But no, it was a digital ghost. It was a highly sophisticated piece of engine control software crafted by some of the best engineers in the business. Its entire purpose, its only job, was to recognize when the car was undergoing an official government emissions test on a laboratory treadmill, which is called a dyno, and then cheat that test. This invisible little string of code allowed Volkswagen to rake in billions and collect prestigious Green Car of the Year awards, all under the watch of their famously demanding CEO, Martin Winterkorn.
But how does a car actually know it's taking a test? This is the fascinating part. The software basically snooped on a very specific set of environmental clues. First, it checked the steering wheel. Was it perfectly straight? Because, you don't turn corners on a laboratory treadmill. Second, it checked the wheels. Are the front drive wheels spinning while the rear wheels stay completely dead stationary? Yep, that's a treadmill. Third, it even checked if the barometric pressure and engine runtime perfectly matched standard laboratory conditions. The exact millisecond the car's brain detected that highly specific combo of conditions, boom, it snapped into dyno mode. The engine would drastically dial back its performance, pumping maximum amounts of urea fluid through the exhaust to scrub it clean. Inside that laboratory cage, it was a perfect, pristine, low-emission machine passing government tests with flying colors. But the absolute second you drove that car off the lot and onto a real road, the second that steering wheel turned even a little bit, the software instantly deactivated the emissions controls so the car would feel peppy and get great gas mileage.
And the result is this number right here. Unfettered by regulations, these cars pumped out toxic clouds of NOx up to 40 times above the legal federal limit. 40 times! The deception wasn't just a little fudge on the numbers, it was absolute.
Chapter 4. The Silent Victims. We need to pause on the brilliant, malicious engineering for a second because there's a very real human cost to this.
Look at this number, 11 million. It's almost hard to wrap your head around. Between 2008 and 2015, Volkswagen flooded international markets with these rigged vehicles. We're talking nearly 500,000 in the US alone, and over 11 million globally across VW, Audi, and Porsche. That is 11 million machines secretly running malicious code, hiding in plain sight.
You know, when a crime happens mostly behind computer screens, it can feel kind of victimless. But the victims here were everyday people. They were hardworking families who were completely duped into paying a premium for fake green technology, only to see the resale value of their cars just absolutely tank later on. But far worse than the financial hit, the victims were innocent people in major cities breathing in illegal, highly concentrated doses of smog. Later independent studies explicitly linked the excessive emissions from these specific vehicles to hundreds of premature deaths and thousands of respiratory illnesses. This wasn't just corporate fraud, it was literally a silent assault on public health.
Chapter 5. The Unlikely Investigation. But as we all know, every perfect crime eventually unravels. And how they got caught? It's a total David and Goliath story.
You'd probably assume it took some high-tech, massive federal intelligence agency to crack this case, right? Not even close. It started with a modest everyday research grant. In 2013, a small team at West Virginia University, led by Professor Arvind Thiruvengadam, just wanted to test real-world emissions. Nothing crazy. They strapped a portable emissions measurement system to the back of a trailer and took 3 cars out on the highway: a BMW SUV, a VW Jetta, and a VW Passat. The BMW passed just fine, but the Volkswagens? The data streaming into their laptops started spiking wildly. It made no sense. The numbers were showing emissions 35 to 40 times higher than the legal limits. They published their findings, handed the data over to the EPA and the California Air Resources Board, and lit the fuse.
What happens next is just fascinating. For over a year, Volkswagen stonewalled. They threw out every excuse in the book. Oh, it's a technical glitch. It's a testing irregularity. People are just driving them wrong. Anything but the truth. But eventually, American regulators had enough and threatened to withhold certification for VW's entire 2016 lineup. Cornered by irrefutable, hard digital proof, the wall of denial finally shattered. In September 2015, a top Volkswagen executive sat down with U.S. regulators and confessed with 5 very simple words: "We completely screwed up."
Chapter 6. Consequences and Legacy. The ghost was finally dragged out into the light.
The fallout was, frankly, catastrophic. Within days of admitting the cheat, 15 billion euros practically vanished from Volkswagen's market value. CEO Martin Winterkorn was forced to resign under immense pressure, though he claimed he knew absolutely nothing about the illegal software. Right. But as investigators began raiding corporate offices, the real truth came out. This wasn't just a couple of rogue engineers acting out. This was a deeply institutionalized strategy spanning over a decade, heavily protected at multiple levels of upper management.
Now, the legal reckoning that followed was really a tale of 2 continents. In the United States, the hammer came down incredibly hard. Volkswagen actually pleaded guilty to criminal felony charges. They paid out over $25 billion in fines, civil penalties, and massive consumer buybacks. Executives even saw real prison time. But over in Europe, it was a totally different story. Regulators moved at a snail's pace. Instead of massive financial compensation, millions of European car owners were basically just handed a software update. It was a glaring, frustrating discrepancy in how international corporate accountability actually works.
But stepping back, the most incredible part of this whole scandal is how it accidentally changed the entire auto industry forever. Dieselgate effectively killed off passenger diesels for good. Automakers everywhere looked at the regulatory nightmare and the complete loss of public trust and realized it just wasn't worth it anymore.
This forced a massive accelerated global pivot toward electric vehicles. And the irony is just profound. By trying to cheat their way to the absolute top of the gas-guzzling era, Volkswagen inadvertently catalyzed the electric revolution.
So what is our ultimate takeaway here? Well, for one, sheer corporate scale is absolutely no guarantee of corporate integrity. We saw brilliant world-class engineering twisted into a weapon of sophisticated deception, simply because ethics were treated like some optional accessory. The ghost in VW's machines has been silenced for sure, but it leaves us with a pretty haunting question to carry forward. If the systems meant to protect us are only as strong as the transparency that we demand, what other digital ghosts are currently hiding in the machines we trust every single day? It's definitely something to think about the next time you turn the key. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking the hard questions, and I'll catch you next time.